balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC. I need to keep reminding myself that on any given show, there are many new listeners. And I have a bad habit of assuming that you know me, certain things about me, and about the show. While I don't want to bore my regular listeners, there are a few things worth repeating once in a while. A little bit about myself. My name is Lori Jill Eisenstadt. I am first and foremost a daughter, a sister, a wife, and a mother. My roots are in Brooklyn, New York, where I was born, and the rest of my heart lies on Long Island, New York, where I grew up and spent a majority of my formative years and early years of marriage and mothering. We moved our family to Phoenix, Arizona a number of years ago, and I could not be happier with the 9 months out of the year that are t-shirt and jeans and shorts kind of weather. You will hear me introduce myself as an IBCLC, and this stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. Because this is so long, myself and my peers, we've kind of picked up a habit of calling ourselves LCs, or lactation consultants. And you know what? This was actually fine for a while. However, in recent years, there have been many weekend or week-long courses that have cropped up. And when a person graduates from that course, they can call themselves a LC, or lactation consultant, or a lactation specialist, or breastfeeding counselor, or a certified breastfeeding counselor, or a certified lactation consultant, or any number of titles. I myself took this course. For me, it was the very, very, very beginning, very entry level to the pathway to becoming an IBCLC. There is a huge distinction between an IBCLC and all of the other titles. While I'm not going to go into all of them on an individual basis, the big difference is the IBCLC has likely had over 1,000 hours, which are likely to have been mentored by another experienced IBCLC, and 1,000 or more hours of helping other moms before they can qualify to take the all-day exam. That when that exam is passed, you get to call yourself an IBCLC. This is exactly my path. All of the other labels that you will hear have probably had between 20 and 100 hours. Usually they've had less than a few weeks to maybe one college semester of learning. And once they graduate, they typically do not have to take any more courses to keep their title. IBCLCs who spend thousands of hours learning are required to recertify every 5 years. When you're suffering with breastfeeding issues, think about who you want helping you. Next season, I'm going to share some more detailed information on the differences. But because this comes up over and over in many questions and emails to me, I thought I would address it for all the newest listeners. For more detailed information about myself and what makes me tick and my why for doing this, just go back into the archives. This means that when you open up iTunes, you have to scroll and scroll until you get to the very first show. Take a listen and you can learn more about me. If subscribing to the show is confusing to you, just check out the show notes and I will walk you through the process. And I will also put links to my very first show along with all of the other shows that I'm going to mention in this podcast in the show notes. For those who are pretty new listeners, you will hear me say over and over again, just go to the show notes. The show notes are on allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast. And you can find the show that you want to listen to. You click that open. And when you do that, there are notes from each individual show. And in that, you will find the links to various places and people and books that I mentioned during each show. On that note of checking out my very first show, I wanted to mention that I have done a number of shows where I have interviewed book authors. Don't worry if you're not in a place where you can write down this information. You can always replay this episode and take notes, or again, guess what? You can just check out the show notes and find the information all there. Some of these are the most popular and heavily downloaded shows. Let's see. Let's go back to episode number 20, where I interviewed Jessica Shortall, who wrote a book on breastfeeding and pumping in the work world. I love the name of her book, Work, Pump, Repeat. She traveled the world postpartum and she dragged her pump to far off places wherever she went. And I love the stories that she shares about how she did this, how she kept her pump with her, pumped milk for her baby, and traveled. Pretty interesting. So go ahead and listen to that show. Episode number 24, one of my favorite authors in the breastfeeding world, Nancy Moorbacher. She wrote a book called Breastfeeding Made Simple, and we get a glimpse into her personal life during this podcast, and we also talk about things that she's written in her book. You know how I like to get personal with my guests, and Nancy did share some fun stuff with us that you just don't learn from a book. Episode number 41. My good friend Vanessa Merton, host of the Pregnancy Podcast, which you should all check into on iTunes. She recently wrote the Birth Plan book, and you can check that out as it is available on Amazon. Next up is another episode that has a lot of downloads, number 44, one of the most popular shows with another great author, Dr. Jack Newman. He is a pediatrician from Canada. He has written so many books and is such a dedicated pediatrician who really cares about breastfeeding. He recently wrote a piece for Huffington Post and asked me to share it with everybody that I know, and I'm happy to do so. And what I'm going to do is talk about some of the parts of his article in a few minutes. I am incredibly psyched for season 2, as I have some really well-known authors that I've interviewed, and you are going to get to know them better and learn a lot. So stay tuned for season 2, which begins in October. On to Dr. Jack Newman's Huffington Post article, which again, I will post a link to his article in the show notes. One of my favorite things that he says that always melts my heart when I hear him say it. Breast milk is not just about the milk, it is a relationship. He is so incredibly wise and so right about this. The title of his article is, Do Mothers Really Have the Right to Choose to Breastfeed? It's a pretty interesting title and one that really made me raise an eyebrow. And then I continued on and read it. This is a pretty hard-hitting article. I am going to go over some parts of it, and I'm very interested to hear your thoughts about it. He goes on to explain that, of course, mothers have the choice. However, he then goes on to explain that while they have the choice, sometimes the odds seem to be against them. Moms are quite reliant on assistance from their healthcare providers as they deem them the experts in breastfeeding. He says that if the slightest problem arises with regard to the mother or baby and their breastfeeding relationship, the first thing many mothers will hear from their doctors is, give the baby formula. Or they might even hear their doctor say, stop breastfeeding altogether. Dr. Newman talks about the common practice of moms being pushed and sometimes forced into bottle feeding their baby. And if they don't comply, they're made to feel like a bad parent because they are not thinking in the best interest of their baby. Once they do comply, frequently the breastfeeding is lost. Mothers are then left frustrated and devastated because they desire to breastfeed and now they are not. They often express feelings of feeling like a failure. Dr. Newman comes from a place of experience and what he sees happen to the mothers at the clinic where he works. He acknowledges that the moms are having problems with breastfeeding. However, he feels that with some good help, the mother can go on to breastfeeding exclusively. He is advocating for the mother to receive excellent and experienced help with breastfeeding as a first, rather than go to pumping and bottle feeding or formula feeding as the first response. Dr. Newman states in his article that in only a small minority of cases do the moms actually get the help they need. I would say that when moms get the right help early on, frequently the fix is simple, and in a few days after receiving help, a majority of moms could be exclusively breastfeeding, and I fully agree with him on that one. The push to move away from breastfeeding is why Dr. Newman feels that, in his words, we don't allow mothers to breastfeed their babies. In his article, Dr. Newman gives a few examples of the myths that have been passed down and the incorrect medical advice that moms are given that frequently send their breastfeeding desires on the wrong path and make it very difficult to exclusively breastfeed. The first myth is that when a mom gives birth to a baby who is less than 34 weeks gestation, that babies must learn to bottle feed before they can breastfeed. His argument with this: there are no scientific studies that prove this. Moms should be encouraged to breastfeed their premature baby. Let's work together with experts and see how your baby does, and then go from there. It is just not true breastfeeding is more tiring than bottle feeding, but this is the myth that seems to be perpetuated. Sometimes a new mother does not have the volume or the flow that her baby wants and needs, and the baby tends to fall asleep at the breast. But there are ways of keeping your baby at the breast while you are building your supply. An experienced IBCLC will be able to help you decide how to proceed and if there is a good reason for alternative feedings. In my private practice, I see it as a standard of care for premature babies to be fed fortified milk with cow's milk. This is another myth that all premature babies need this. Dr. Newman feels that not all babies need this fortifier, and it should be decided on an individual basis, and if they do need additional milk to be fortified, it can be made from human milk. This is a very important point because in order for your baby to get this fortifier, they need to get it from a bottle or from some other alternative feeding method. What if your baby is breastfeeding well and actually does not need the fortifier? Then we have introduced the bottle, which frequently undermines the breastfeeding. The next myth is one that drives me absolutely insane, and I know you have heard me rant about this before. Babies born with low blood sugar or who are tested during their hospital stay are often forced to feed their baby formula. This is insane. What we know is that this baby more than likely needs more milk, more mommy's milk, not cow's milk. What we know is that this baby needs its mother's milk, which is far better for preventing and treating low blood sugar than formula is. So, why are mothers told to feed their babies formula? I believe it is because there is a lack of knowledge of how breastfeeding works, the importance of good latches and milk transfer, and a huge lack of knowledge about the properties in human milk. Other concerns are brought up in the article as additional reasons that moms are told they cannot breastfeed or they need to supplement. I will have a link to the article in the show notes. It is interesting to note and important for me to say that there are enough times in my private practice where I do feel a baby needs to be supplemented. The first choice is always mother's milk or donor milk. The reason I find the need for babies to be supplemented is that At the point where I get to work with the mom, the breastfeeding has been severely compromised, the supply is way low, and the weight loss is way too much, and the baby is very, very, very sleepy. What would not have been a big problem, what could have been a fairly easy fix in the very early day or 2 or 3, now may take a lot more work, supplements, and many days to turn around. However, it can still be done, and I see this happen every single day with the moms I work directly with. I often tell moms, here is what you need to turn this around. Continue to stay motivated and dedicated to your goal of exclusive breastfeeding. A commitment to ensuring your baby is well fed and you are doing all you can to boost your supply if it is low. You need to keep doing all you can to work on breastfeeding. Some good old-fashioned family support and excellent help from a professional IBCLC. It never fails to give me goosebumps to see how quickly many seemingly difficult situations are turned around in a week or 2 of dedicated work. Thanks to all the authors I've interviewed. You have written great books that help the breastfeeding mom with all aspects of breastfeeding. And thank you, Dr. Newman, for another great article. I hope that we can carry on this conversation in our Facebook group. I'm interested to hear what other people have to say. You can share what your experience has been. If you haven't joined yet, go ahead and do so. Just search for All About Breastfeeding Community in Facebook and click on the link that says Join. Become involved in the conversation, introduce yourself, and let's have fun getting to know one another. If you want to have a say in what kind of shows I produce, go into the Facebook group and participate in the poll in which I ask you, what kind of shows do you want to see more of? One of the many reasons I am loving this Facebook group is the ease and the ability to connect with moms all over the world. Christina is a new member, and I would like to say, hi, Christina. Thanks for introducing yourself. I thought what you had to say was so interesting, I'm going to read your introductory post on the air. Here it goes. I'm a regular listener from Sweden. Thanks a million for all the episodes so far. I just joined this group because breastfeeding has become a genuine interest of mine, both the practice and the theory behind it. I like that it is a craft, fine art, and science, all in one nurturing bonding act. And you know what? You got that right, Christina. She says, I'm 33 years old and I'm currently on maternity leave with my first child, a girl just about to turn 18 months, and also just about to be entered into public daycare system. Yikes. Put together, I've been home 12 months and my husband 7. I'm still breastfeeding, pretty much on demand, and plan on keeping it up until she self-weans. Sweden and our neighbors, most of all Norway, are best in class when it comes to being family-friendly. I think that all our hospitals are baby-friendly ones, and parental leave is paid 80% of your salary, and we can start our leave 2 months before the baby even comes. And if one can afford it, you could stretch the parental pay to cover 2 or 3 years at home. Most people, though, opt for about 18 months at home. And I can just hear and see the moms from the United States just going crazy at this. Christina says, I would say that breastfeeding is absolutely considered to be the norm and encouraged in her country. That being said, there's room for improvement. Good knowledge on breastfeeding is not widely spread. Healthcare providers promote that breast milk is the best for baby, but it is not always evidence-based advice that is being given to mothers on breastfeeding. I was told to feed every 4th hour by a pediatrician in the hospital after delivering our daughter. A nurse gave us a pacifier on day 2 and said that we should always keep formula at home just in case. A third one confirmed that breastfeeding did hurt and it was something to muster through before it got better. Thankfully, there are a lot of knowledgeable individuals in the system as well. And all in all, we got off to a good start. What makes me sad is that we were lucky to meet the right person and she could offer valuable insights that should be given to all new mothers. You're absolutely right, Christina. Also, while breastfeeding is the norm, in the general mind, it raises eyebrows when breastfeeding past a year. From what I experienced, it is expected to phase out breastfeeding somewhere between 6 to 12 months. Everything into the second year is extended breastfeeding. And then she writes, okay, this clearly turned into a novel. Well, Christina, thanks for your post. Not only am I not afraid of novels like this, I truly enjoy them, and I imagine other members do also. What better way to learn about life in other countries than to have moms share their own stories? In the United States, we are light years behind in paid maternity leave. Just one more subject that drives me absolutely insane. I've been talking about this for over 25 years. The system as we now have it is a huge barrier for moms and breastfeeding. Some of us are just beginning to find our groove, and before we know it, it's time to return to work. Not in Sweden, where you can stay home for 18 months and be paid 80% of your salary. This is so wonderful. Moms in the United States, can you imagine how much less stressful your life would be like if that were the case for you? No more crazy pumping postpartum, trying to stash away as much milk as you possibly can for your return to work. No more trying to figure out pumping at work or taking on that extra workload. No more figuring how to get your baby to and from daycare and pay for it. The benefits of paid maternity leave are miles long. And I know there are some wonderful people in the U.S. working very hard to make this happen. As a matter of fact, Jessica Shortall, who I mentioned as my guest from episode number 20, she is working very hard to make this happen. She also gave an excellent TED Talk on this very subject, which in her podcast notes, you will find a link to that TED Talk. I have a great show for you next week as we talk to a new mother. She recently had her second baby, is a postpartum doula, and we have a great discussion about all things breastfeeding. And at the end of the interview, she shares a fun story of how we met and what happened when we met. Sort of sounds like a cliffhanger. Well, stay tuned and you'll find out. One last thing before I sign off. I am a woman on a mission now. I continue to learn and always strive to do my best with this podcast. And I'm soon going to be reaching 100 episodes. And now that we're heading into season 2, I'm really finding my stride. And all the About Breastfeeding show, I really wanted to grow. I want to grow my audience. And one of the easiest way to continue to grow my audience by leaps and bounds is to have my listeners literally share this show with your friends. Send them links to the show in an email or a text message or a Facebook message. Just think of all that you've learned so far by listening to the show. Can you think of a few friends who are newly pregnant or just gave birth and are breastfeeding? Of course you can. Go ahead and share this show with them. The next thing I'm going to ask you is a very big favor. It's not hard, and it doesn't take you more than 5 minutes, but it'll take you a few minutes. I really want mothers to have access to this show, and the absolute capital BEST, the absolute best way to do this is for each one of you to just take 5 minutes and go to iTunes. Search for the show. If you have not yet, subscribe to the show. Then the next biggest thing you can do for me is rate and review the show. It is those 5-star reviews that makes iTunes stand up and pay attention and make this show more visible to people who are searching for it in iTunes. I will leave you with this one quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Until the next show, bye-bye.